going to hand over to the other RD that we have in this panel conversation, being Richard Davies.
Thank you, Andrew. My name is Richard Davis. I'm a director at Kier Construction, and I'm the director responsible for social sustainability in the business. Good.
Short and sweet. Thanks, Rich. We'll be coming back.
Sorry, I'm slightly distracted by the dog that is sat on Andrew's head. We need to watch that.
Thank you. And Daniel, welcome to the panel. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, good morning, folks. I'm Dan Coyne, Communities Manager for Cheshire East Council, often leading on a lot of the training from a commissioning perspective for the public sector of how we can embed commissioning social value within our contracts with goods and suppliers of services through the public sector. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so I mean, it would be fair to say that social value has been around and as a topic, you know, for the last 5-10 years, but particularly in the last year and again in the last 3 months, we have really seen that there's hardly any conversation that's happening from a procurement or a tendering or a contracting perspective where social value isn't sort of the one, you know, rule 101. What are we doing about it? What does it mean to us? And how can we get this right for our organisations and for all of our stakeholders? So for me, this is an opportunity to ask the panel, well, what does social value mean to you? And also, what can we learn from that evolution of you know, CSR into social value and beyond? So I'd like to kick off with Andrew, if I could, around what does it mean to you in your role, and what are you learning? What are you seeing around these trends? How this is moving on?
Yeah, first things first, Richard. Yeah, that's Teddy the dog. If he does suddenly kick off and start barking, because that's what dogs do, I will have to mute myself. I'm sure somebody else will take over. So apologies if he does in advance. Right, social value. I was once asked the question, what does social value mean to you in, you know, the shortest way possible? And I always answered it with doing the right thing. So, you know, 4 simple words, but I can add another 4 words to that, which is engage your moral compass. And that is what social value is about. I mean, you know, we do so much of this already, just in our standard, you know, life and what we do and our buying choices and everything else. So it's just been expanded out into the world of commercial, as in, you know, how you go through procurement, how you engage with suppliers on a social value element. People were already doing it beforehand. Now it's just become more of a requirement to do it rather than just an added bonus, which is quite nice. So seeing how that's all grown and pushed forward, and the fact that it's now part of the requirement is wonderful to see. Actually, I do love the social value side. It does fit in very, very nicely with what I do with regards to environment as well. So, you know, there's some strong links.
What about the journey? You know, you'll have seen things evolving yourself particularly over the last 12 months. You know, what does that mean to you? What trends are you seeing there?
Well, what's nice, the amount of local authorities that I've dealt with that have actually already started on this journey long before it became a requirement. And, you know, they're almost saying, actually, I feel a little bit vindicated here. You know, what we're asking for isn't weird. We're asking for something that other people are also asking for. So, and it's nice to see, even though the PPM, which I know Richard will cover off later, the PPN, you know, puts on a 10% weighting to tenders on social value. We've already seen various councils put in 20%. They consider it much higher in their league, which I always say just means that their moral compass is pointing in the right direction, which is always a good thing. Okay. So that's my sort of lead on.
Thank you, Andrew. And the same question to yourself, Davina. What does social value mean to you, and what trends are you seeing in the evolution from sort of what was, you know, the sort of CSR typically into social value?
I think from our point of view, sort of being a supplier and a supplier of services, social value is sort of really focusing on the people and being used as a tool to address inequality as well. So it's how you can use social value and social value through procurement and commissioning to sort of quantify more consistently the changes that you can make to people's lives, and then start to build a picture of which changes provide an enduring impact in communities. So I think that's really interesting from my point of view. In terms of the journey from CSR to social value, certainly when I started working with people with disabilities, which is quite a long time ago now, the CSR emphasis was very much like, what can we do for these poor disabled people are blessed, they need us to do something to them or for them. Whereas culturally, the way in which we work with people with disabilities and other disadvantaged groups has been very much about enabling those groups to have a more equitable playing field. And I think that's a good lens to look at social value through. So I think the evolution of CSR to social value is a lot more relational. It's about understanding and bringing together the relationships within a community that can create an enduring impact for the beneficiaries in the community that you're seeking to serve. So I think that for me is of interest, and that is what is providing a change at a community and societal level for people with disabilities in my case, or it may be other beneficiary groups in other people's cases. So that for me is the really exciting part of the journey, because that's enduring difference.
Thank you. And I think you've touched upon sort of the tackling inequality, which is clearly a key message that's coming out of the COVID recovery piece as well. So I think that's something that will come out again as we go through the discussion. Richard, Davis, I think the question to yourself, what does social value mean to you in your role from a Kia perspective? And just briefly, how have Kia evolved, from a position of CSR into social value?
So I would like to mirror much of what Andrew said, but from the other side of the fence, if you like. I can take you back 30 years when I started my career as a site manager, and whether it was building schools or hospitals, if you put me in a field somewhere, and our site managers won't be any different, you want to leave a positive impact, positive legacy on the community that you're leaving behind. So I think it's already embedded in a lot of what we do. And then as the journey, you wind the clock forward, particularly as sort of the procurement routes changed into frameworks where there was collaboration, and frameworks could see that they could draw more from the framework in terms of deliverables for the contractor, making commitments and pledges. We then started to put people in place in a specific role that at that time, and to some extent still today, we called corporate social responsibility. And I think at that point the subtle difference was that it was seen exactly that, as a corporate requirement, a thing that you sort of had to do. And now I think we realise that it's something that we have to do, not just because it's moral requirement of us, but we have to survive. It's actually the actual way of working. To actually maintain our positions on frameworks is important, but we're actually embedded. And so when I look at my definition, it's in the center, and it's quite a bold statement to make for us in some ways, but it's at the center of everything we do, whether it's the procurement and the partnerships we have with our supply chain, whether it's the carbon agenda that we've got, or whether it's how we look after our people. So it's dead center of everything that we've got.
I think that's great, and I think again there's opportunity to talk about when we think about Build Back Better and this thriving economy, and how construction is playing a role within that as we go through the chat. Dan, I think the same question to yourself from a local authority perspective. What is it that social value means to yourselves, and just briefly, that evolution as well?
Yeah, I think from what it means to myself and as an organisation, as a local authority, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I probably would have said a tick box exercise. If being real, I think what it means now is kind of mirroring some of the things that people have said. It's doing the right thing. It's about how we can start to inspire collaboration and relationship building through social value, which we're starting to see much more of as our model starts to mature. And what it does as a local authority for us is held a mirror up against us. It's good for us to embed it within when we're purchasing something. But there's no good us talking the talk if we're not walking the walk. So if we're asking people to improve their recruitment policy around, increasing around, I don't know, veterans or hard to reach groups or people with disabilities, and we have a low employment rate ourselves, then we're not doing the right thing. We haven't held that mirror up. So from an organisational perspective, we have, and then we're starting to improve how we ethically operate as a local authority. We're spreading that message with our public sector colleagues, and then we're starting to want to do that with the organisations we work with, our goods and suppliers of services. So for me, it's really about collaborating and relationship building, what it means to me now. We've seen a lot of sort of private sector organisations, through their commitments from CSR and social value, really support the third sector and communities, but I've also seen it happen the other way around. A lot of the third sector who have had council contracts that want to improve their SV have really put pledges of how they can help the private sector, supporting them to it, for example, of developing volunteering day opportunities, caring and carers policies and things like that. So there's a real collaboration for me, what it means now. That more around the trend, and I've kind of gone a little bit into that from where it was what it was to me 5 years ago and what it is now. From an organisation or a private sector point of view, it's a sexy thing to do. Marketing, it really is. And for me, there's nothing better than bolstering that, massaging egos, shouting about the good stuff you've done. And for me, for marketing, people choose ethically now much more than they used to. They don't necessarily, and I think a lot around with the David Attenborough, the climate change, the Gretna, all of those things have inspired people to maybe shop and do things differently and purchase things differently. So the more you can shout about your commitments to SV, for me, there is no wrongdoing in that. And I think from a local authority point of view, it's moved from and I mentioned a tick box, but the so what. So what we used to find is our commitment to social value is this, and we'd say, brilliant, that sounds great, but we didn't really monitor the so what. So an organisation, we're going to talk to 19 schools about reducing, going for more of a single use of plastic, or learning about X, Y, and Z. So what? Did it have an impact? So we've kind of started to look more of the impact point of view, not just what your commitments are, but what are they actually achieving? So it's kind of it's moved us from outputs to impact from a monitoring point of view as well. Thank you.
So I think then that summary from the panel really helps shape the discussion around, we get a sense of why we're seeing this shift towards driving up social value. But I think the question is why at this time, and what could the COVID recovery mean to public procurement? I mean, I think, Rich Dickens, if I could come to you, we've talked briefly about the public procurement notice 06. We've got things around Build Back Better. Why do you think the government are introducing those approaches now, and why do you think it's so timely that we be considering those from a social value point of view?
Depends how long you've got, Nat. I think the key thing here is really several points, but first point is Brexit. Brexit is playing an influencing factor. We've got an opportunity from a procurement point of view to change how we procure goods and services. We don't have to be so open within the EU, and therefore we can actually be in charge of our own destiny. The Public Sector Social Value Act, when it first came out, was great and it showed an intent, but it didn't show a lot of teeth. And it was all that should, and it kind of evolved, it trickled on. But as people have been more passionate about actually achieving far greater impact, and impact is value, outcomes is not. It's a way of feeling. It's a soft activity. So what there's been is a big focus towards, okay, how can we do things differently? How can we achieve more? I hate to say it, for less. And it is that. It is trying to develop change. It's trying to focus more heavily on, okay, let's deliver products and services, but we know there's so much more is possible. but we don't understand how to articulate it, how to gather it, how to evidence it, and how then to contract manage it. So what's kind of happened is an evolution to say, well, OK, how do we unlock all this value? We know that companies have it. We know that third sector have it. We know that collaborations and consortiums have it. So through the Green Paper that was launched on the 15th of December last year, which was the public procurement reform paper. Now, it is just a Green Paper and it's got several stages to go before it gets royal assent. But in there, it showed a greater intent post-Brexit to say, OK, let's move away from the most economically advantageous tender, the MEAT, to MAT, the most advantageous tender, looking at the whole value of a contract, a whole value of delivery. And actually, from that point of view, it's almost giving people permission to say, OK, we can look a little bit wider. We can showcase what we do with so much passion and enthusiasm, but it's going to be taken notice of. So that's starting to encourage a lot more people to be a lot more influential and open. Value comes from anywhere. It comes from a private business as much as it does as a one-person organisation. We've got charity, we've got public sector, we've got private sector all showcased here today, both large and small. We're an SME, so we experience this as well. But also, if you've got the PPN 11, the Public Procurement Notice 11, it's looking at how can we or could we restrict tenders based on locality. So again, this is starting to champion and celebrate the potential of local first. And it's not been legally challenged because it's only new. It only came into force on the 1st of January this year. So it's still quite new, but how important could this be in smaller organisations, smaller focused businesses, SMEs, to start to demonstrate how influential they are in their own local economy, to local people, local business, local supply chain, local partners? There's so much potential here to be able to do it. And as both Dan and Andrew, I think, alluded to, society's changing. Society is changing to the point where we want to do things differently. We are in some ways influenced by the COVID recovery and building back stronger, galvanising the goodwill, the initiative, the passion and the enthusiasm that we've had. And now we've got supporting legislation that actually will encourage organisations not to hide behind that and start to showcase it for the very first time, which I think in itself is fantastic. And with the added weightings for public sector, actually there is an incentive. Charities being the same.
I think so. The point, couple of points you brought out there around the benefits and opportunities for local and national. I think that's something that we need to sort of tackle head on. And Richard Davis, with that in mind, from your perspective, you are, Kier Group, you are a national, but you also have regional and localized roles. So from your perspective, what can we be doing from here on in, considering that COVID recovery piece as well, but taking advantage of having both a national or a regional and a localized footprint? How do you approach that to deliver value?
Good question. I would say, to begin with, from our perspective, we're the phrase that we band around is we're a regional business that we operate locally. So much of our social value is driven from our local businesses through the frameworks and the collaborations that they've got locally. So the majority of the activity that we do on the ground is within the regions, directly related to the regions that they work in, directly, the relationships that we have with our customers are being managed locally. At a national level, particularly around the big frameworks, so the DFE framework for us, the health frameworks, it's working with those frameworks at a national level to collaborate over what is best practice, where do we want to drive the value from. And then I think, particularly the piece around the pandemic for us at a national level was about how do we keep all of our projects open throughout the pandemic. I think the stat at best, or the low point, if you like, is that we actually only closed 20 projects during the lockdown. So there was a massive drive to keep the wheels of industry turning during the pandemic, just to keep people at work. So I think that was significant, important. That's the bit that stands out of the pandemic for me. And then what falls out of that is the drive working with our government partners to, there's a lot of talk about shovel-ready projects. How can we help them, get those to ground quicker so that we actually are, kickstarting the economy. So we work close with all of our partners on that front, with a bit of extra drive to get those jobs on the ground.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And I think that feeds into the question that I'd like to sort of direct towards Davina, really, about being able to collaborate in that space. From a charity perspective, just by the nature of what you do, you are facilitating social value. But it's how can you then give some advice to the people listening in today, or some experience of how you've had meaningful partnerships and delivered lasting impact with the private and the public sector. For those of us that might be listening and thinking, well, okay, well, how do I actually reach out as a charity or as a private sector? How do I actually go and find the right charity partner or the right values mix for what we need to do locally?
I think just reflecting on points that the two Richards have made, this is a really good time to start thinking about collaboration and how voluntary community sector charities and private sector can work more closely together. Because of the disruptions that we've faced, and because of ongoing changes that will come because of Brexit, there's a really good opportunity to reconsider what have been quite established and traditional ways of working in many sectors. I mean, certainly, I've spent my career in education and social care sectors, and there are quite established and entrenched ways of working, commissioning and providing services to, a range of people within those sectors. And this, the experience of COVID, where of course we've delivered all of our services throughout the pandemic because it's not optional, the different ways of working and the different ways of collaborating with different partners has been really great to try out new ways of working. And I think we'll leave a legacy whereby charities, certainly larger charities, national charities, and voluntary and community sector are more flexible and open in the ways in which we can deliver services. Particularly, I mean, we've the immediate one when I think about collaborating with large organisations is we have a fantastic relationship with EDF Energy. So we've worked with EDF Energy since 2012, and we've developed a variety of programmes with them. One of the key programmes we have with them is a supported internship model where they host young people with disabilities, and in an extended work placement we provide education to those young people in EDF, and we work with job buddies and job coaches within EDF to enable those young people to get skills for employment and progress on. So I mean, the social values, fantastic for that programme. And interestingly, what came out whenever we've measured the social value of this particular programme is the difference that it makes to the community of employees at EDF Energy, and the difference that those employees then make within their own communities. So we are a national charity. We work with 54 local authorities taking young people from across the UK. But where you see a real difference is where we've got these embedded local projects where all of the staff from EDF are going home and they're having conversations about disabilities. They're interacting with members of their community who have a disability where they wouldn't have previously. And those are the really nice stories and narratives that come about. And this is, I think, what goes back to that original sort of opening gambit, which what does social value mean to you? And the social value is so much more than a disabled person getting a job. It's all of the hearts and minds that one disabled person has changed along the way, and those people who've had their hearts and minds changed going into their communities and changing for the hearts and minds. So that's really when you're talking about the moral compass and the direction people take, the ripple effect of that is really significant, where you can get these partnerships working really well. I think COVID as well has given us an opportunity to reflect upon and think about how isolated some members of our communities have become as well. And it's given us a chance, you know, in the variety of roles that we all have in life. I mean, we're all probably sitting here as an employee, a parent, a child to someone, and thinking about how we can use all of the interactions that we have to make sure that people are able to connect within their communities. And I think that's become really apparent to a lot of organisations. A lot of the work we're starting to focus our research element of our charitable work upon is how to reduce isolation, loneliness, those long-term relational difficulties that people face in communities, and then taking that a step further and thinking about how as a charity we can engage some larger employers into doing that piece of work with us is something which I think will probably have an enduring impact. And that has come about because of COVID and the changes that we're seeing and our changing attitudes at this time.
I thank you. I think that, I mean, the comments across the panel are really starting to lead us down to the next stage of thinking, and I can see in some of the chat as well about, okay, how do we start to effectively measure the impact? You know, how do we navigate the differences between ESG, CSR, social value, and how do we put all of that into a coordinated strategy that can then have, you know, an effective position within tendering and business development? So I think we'll, from a panel perspective, we'll take the question in that way now around, okay, what should we be doing to be tender ready and to be effectively measuring and accountable for the claims that we make as well? So I think Andrew and Dan, I'm going to come to you two first and get your views on that. So Andrew, if I can, what should companies be doing to be firstly effectively measuring, but also become, you know, really tender ready from a social value perspective?
Okay, remember to unmute. This is one, I could do an hour just on this one question, basically. And one of the notes I've made for myself against sort of like this tender ready is for the suppliers, take yourself back to school, okay? In the fact that I know my teachers used to always say to me, read the question twice. Yeah. And that's what it's about. So when a local authority or when a customer comes forward and says, right, this is what the social value is for this particular project, read what they actually want and, you know, base your answer against that. One of the difficulties we've got, and this is something that actually that Davina sort of hinted at, Davina's charity is a countrywide charity. A lot of local authorities will look at how can we have everything to be local? We want everything to be local so that our councillors look to being local, that we're doing everything local, we're increasing local, which may have a negative effect on what they're actually pushing forward on their, you know, for their project itself to get the best value for the project. So, you know, it's how do they engage with a national charity and local charities in order to achieve this? You know, how do they move forward? So it's almost an impossible question to answer because it depends on what the social value is of the project and depends on what they're expecting from the supplier. So some suppliers may turn around and say, well, we've been doing social value for years. After all, we've had a living wage, which can be classed as part of social value. So you're already, they're already looking down that particular route and have been for years. Or they could say, we work with local charities, emphasis on the local. But you will have suppliers, national suppliers such as Kier, who may support national charities similar to Davina's. So it's hard to become tender ready, but what they need to do is they need to show, I'll allude to the moral compass again, they need to show that they're not in it for the quick buck and pay the shareholders. They're in it because of the future that it's going to bring. So this could be anything from them saying, well, we look at all the projects we do. I want to pick on the building. I do apologise, Keir, on the Keir side of things with Richard. I'll pick on the buildings. They could turn around and say, everything we build, we look at all the materials that we're going to use and make sure there's sustainable material. It's recycled steel. We limit the amount of concrete we use because of the overall social value effects of using something that produces a lot of greenhouse gases. Yeah, so they could say that as their social value statement moving forward, saying this is how we can respond to tenders when they say, what social value do you do with your business? But then the tender may also ask for something very specific with the social value requirement of the projects they're going to run. So if the project they're going to run is involving, say, building an extension to a school for children with learning difficulties, then there may be an involvement there to get Davina's charity involved in that. So then, it depends on what the tender is. It depends how it can be pieced together. But for yourself, it's, just think to yourself, are the processes we use correct? Are they good? Are they strong? And will they stand up to scrutiny if somebody turned around and said, what about this aspect of your business? Is that looking at the social value or, the environment and so on and so forth, being able to push forward? You're on mute.
On that point of accountability, and again, this is a question will come to others on the panel. What can organisations be doing to make sure that they are, they have the evidence to demonstrate that they're being accountable and there's transparency? And Rich Dickens, I know you'll have a view on that, but Andrew, is there anything from your perspective, from a sort of central government view, that best practice, coming down the track? Contract management, that kind of thing. What should organisations be preparing for now in terms of, they go out and they do a lot of things and they might measure it, but is it enough? Do they need to be having independent verification, or do they need to be working differently with contract management and reporting? For example, do you see social value becoming more central to contract targets and kind of like penalised and things like that?
On that side of things, I can't say whether or not it's going to go down a penalised route or not. I just would not know, and that's for other people within the government to decide to go down that particular route. For myself, if any company said to me, "What can we do?" Have very clear, measurable KPIs against yourself. Measure yourself so that if any contracting authority turns around and say, "Oh, you say that you do this. What's your proof? This is what we do." Very clear. It's one of those things, honesty is the best policy, and be open and transparent about what you do with regards to your social value. Now, something Daniel mentioned earlier was all about the collaboration. Open, if you actively collaborate with another firm, it helps with that. Yeah, something that Richard mentioned was when in his opening bit. Sorry, that's Richard Davies. There's reputational value against this as well. If you try and sort of like, oh yeah, we do this, and you don't, you will be found out, guaranteed. Somebody, on social media will say, well, actually, you don't do any of that. You're just, you're taking this as a mug. But being open, transparent, which is kind of part of social value anyway, and that moral side of what you want to do. This is what we do. This is how we do it, and this is what we give back. Whether it's we take on 6 apprenticeships a year or 1, doesn't matter, or we work with local educational authorities of areas where we do work, or we support charities like Davina's. It's being very open about it and holding yourself to account under your own KPIs, because then when an authority or a customer wants to see that, you've got the data to give.
You got it. Yeah, so basically taking ownership rather than waiting to be led. Yeah, and having a strategy around that. And I think, Dan, if we could come to you, we know that Cheshire East have been heavily involved in shaping a social value award for the supply chain and stakeholders. You know, what led you to want to do that, and why do you think that's beneficial in terms of helping certainly your regional suppliers evidence their commitment to social value?
Yeah, that was probably the rationale of starting that piece of work. You posed question really of you know, what is it people are sorry, my laptop has all of a sudden gone very funny. Oh, I'm back to normal again. Everyone went very blurry then. So, you know, how can people be tender ready? What can we do? And then how can we measure those things? So we've done a big piece of work with Richard and around the Social Value Award over the last sort of 12 months to kind of get it to the position it's in now. But kind of just going back to that sort of be tender ready, and the Social Value Award will support a lot of that activity and get you on that sort of journey. Because I appreciate, you know, you look at Kia, who you know, at one end of the scale, and other organisations at other ends of the scale. But know your service, know what your service offers. What expertise have you got in your organisation that you think would benefit other people or the local society? What could you do to improve how you operate ethically? And what are the needs of your current clients or the beneficiaries of whatever you're tendering for? What are those needs? Sort of think it through and then think about how that can match what expertise you have is in your organisation. I would say in terms of being tender ready, you know, whoever you're tendering to, whether it be the local authority or not, I'd still engage with your local authority. They understand the needs and priorities of their communities. That's one of their roles. So whether it's through their corporate plans, their health and wellbeing plans, their joint strategic needs assessment, or local engagement they undertake, they understand the needs. So there's a bit of, you don't always need to kind of do all of the work first. You can, there's often information there you can link to. And particularly if you're going for a local authority contract, they're going to want to see if you've already linked into what some of those measures and needs are. And I'd speak to others, you know, I mentioned before about collaborate, and that's what it's about, this, so it can be anyway, is, you know, speak to third sector providers where you think you might, you know, work in. You know, we see a lot of tenders come into local authority that are collaborative applications or consortia bids. You could have a collaborative element just for the SV around this, about what your commitment might be. So, for example, across Cheshire, we have an organisation called Cheshire Connect to do a lot of brilliant work around linking private sector and third sector organisations together. So often there's infrastructure already there that you can just tap into rather than you starting from scratch. In terms of the stuff around what to measure, you know, often your organisation you're tendering to, if they really put the time and effort into this, will have some stuff available to them. So as a local authority, we have a social value policy. We link a lot with the national TOMs, the themes, outcomes and measures. We use a lot of those baselines to look at things we will measure. But as part of your response to tender, if it's the local authority or whoever, just see what they may use. And as part of your response to tender, think about the qualitative. You know, this is what we're going to do. This is our commitment to social value. But also try and think about the quantitative. How are we going to measure it as an organisation? Because often local authorities or organisations that are wanting providers to bid for pieces of work want to know how they intend to measure it as well. You know, local authorities and organisations will have their own, but if somebody is coming to them to say, we're going to do this and this is how we're going to measure the output, the outcome, and more importantly, what impact it has on folks, you know, you're kind of doing a lot of the work previously, prior, which as a council officer, we were more than happy if you've already done the work before so. And also describe, you know, think about what you already do. So we often see tenders come in where we're saying, you know, we're going to do, you know, be proportionate. So if the contract's worth £200,000, you're not going to employ 10 people. It's very unlikely. So if that's the sort of commitment to social value, we're going to employ 10 people from Cheshire East or Crewe or Macclesfield, where, you know, your employment rate is low. it's not really proportionate, it's not really real. So think about what you already do and demonstrate it, because it's brilliant, and then think about what you're tendering for and how what you already do can link in with that, or what you can do as an addition to that. From a council perspective, a very local perspective, obviously the award itself really starts to generate the thinking. The work that Richard has done around the Social Value Award really starts to whet appetite about looking in the mirror, your own organisation, what you already do. Sometimes you do a lot of this stuff, but you're not just measuring it or singing about it and praising about it. So think about that. And as a local authority, we're looking at introducing sort of two elements really that helps generate ideas. So we're going to be launching a crowdfunding platform where you might see organisations that will see projects on the crowdfund that they might want to either invest in or invest time and resource into, so volunteer days, business expertise, or an amount of money. And we're also launching next week a product that allow volunteering to become a lot more easier. So actually, as part, if you wanted to link in with, so you'll start to understand local needs from a project perspective and actual local needs from a volunteer perspective. So do the research is what I'd say. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just conscious we've got about 10 minutes left of panel chat before we then bring our listeners in and asking some questions. So I would like to just go around the panel and ask just sort of quite short and snappy really, what you think one opportunity might be and what the call to action would be for people listening on today's webinar. So Rich Dickens, if I can come to you, what you think one opportunity could be from the momentum around social value, and what is that call to action that you would give?
Ooh, one of many. The opportunity is to be clear on your value proposition. Your value proposition based on what your stakeholder values. So the reason why I say that is quite often when we deliver value, we are unsure about what we should do, where we should do it, how we should do it. Is it right? Is it wrong? And will it be valued? Ultimately, your stakeholders are the key. You know, whether it's clients, whether it's service users, whether it's commissioners, communities, it doesn't really matter in many ways. Understanding what they value most and creating those commitments. That is your opportunity to start to drive what your own USP is within social value, and then starts to put it into a context that people understand. The reason why that's important is you will start to measure that as a focus. You drive it back to what your organization values, and also start to create those key quick wins, very showcase what your organization's about, as well as start to identify where you can collaborate and operate.
So what's your call to action? What's your one thing people should leave this webinar and go away and do? Very simply, VIP, Value Intelligence Program. Go out, find out what your stakeholders value. Thank you. Okay, Andrew, and the question to yourself, what are the opportunities for all types of organisations at the moment? What, the main opportunities you see, and what would that one call to action be after leaving this webinar?
Take myself off mute. Crikey, that is actually, again, another interesting question. Mainly because all I can think of is the call to action side. I can't really concentrate on anything else.
Give us that then. Give us the call to action. Go on, what is it?
Well, the call to action is what I've been saying all along, what the panel as a whole have been saying, is doing the right thing. So if you're, if you're working with a supplier, or you are a supplier, think yourself, right, have we got a social value policy? And do we adhere to it? Do we hold ourselves to account with it? So your call to action would be, make sure this is in place. If you're a customer, if you're a local authority, health centre, it doesn't matter. Have you got a social value policy that you hold in place? Yeah, and we have alluded to, and I know Daniel did, about the tick box exercises of many moons ago. It would just be, Do you think about local area? Yeah, right, that's it. Okay, done. There's a tick in that, don't have to worry about it. Promote it, tell everyone what you're doing, but make sure you've got a very clear, it doesn't even have to be that detailed, but a very clear understanding of what your social value is as an industry, as a supplier, or as a customer, and that you promote that social value as well. So then people can see what, if one area always has, if they're concentrating on something similar, then you know that that's a social value issue within that area that everybody's going for. So doing your homework, but that would be my call to arms, is because that's all I've been thinking about, is sort of like, make sure that is done and you do it as well. You don't just do it as we'll just write this, it'll be fun when get someone on the website, well, we look good, reputational value, but make sure you show it, you prove it, you show what you do.
Thank you. Richard Davis, just coming to yourself from your own perspective within Kia, what do you think there's an opportunity, a standout opportunity, either for sort of local suppliers, or just what would your thoughts be around that one opportunity for developing social value, and what would your call to action be to anybody listening?
So I think you're seeing a common theme here. It's that localism, local needs analysis. I think Daniel just said it, is really get alongside the customer and understand what they want. I think that's the simple bit. So even us as a big regional business, our bids will be focused on what those local needs are, to make sure you're actually hitting the buttons. I think the other piece for me is be authentic. I think that's the bit that Andrew's just said.
Yeah.
I've seen in our business where tenders have actually come back out to tender because when they've looked at the commitments that the contractors have made, they've not been able to unravel it because I think clearly some have over committed or it's not real. Using Daniel's example, the £200,000 project with 10 jobs, it's not happening. So I think the call. And I think we're going to see when everyone gets on board this bus, it's going to get messy for a bit. And, my call would be to be authentic about what you're proposing to deliver and demonstrate it. The piece that we've spent the last 6 months doing, there is how do we want to measure social value in the business, and not, just beyond, how do we convert that into a monetized value. So national TOMs would be the sort of example that's out there, but how do we do that within our business to get to a level that again is authentic and can be verified? So I think that's the journey that others will be going on just the same.
Thank you. And Davina, finally to your point, what opportunities do you see that there are out there, and from your perspective as a charity, to have a central role with alongside suppliers, and also what would your call to action be?
I'm quite glad I got to go last on this one, outside of being stuck with Andrew on call to action for the whole thing. I think from my point of view, the call to action is being innovative for your stakeholders, really. So it's about going to the communities that you are there to serve, there to engage with, there to address an inequality, make a difference for. And it's working with them, co-creating, co-producing the outcomes, the differences that those communities want to see. And I think, if we are thinking in this way and we're thinking ahead, we are in that really fortunate position of being able to make sure that the voices that we amplify and the thoughts and practices that we put across are really, really informed by the communities that we are seeking to help and empower in this process. Else it's not going to have the value it could have. So I think that is really important. My biggest call to arms is always the amplification of the voices of people who cannot be heard. The other thing is really thinking about the partnerships we form, and understanding the reciprocal benefits within partnerships, because I think partnerships historically, certainly when responding to some tender documentation, there's been an inequality of partnerships, which has been slightly tokenistic the tick box exercise that Dan was talking about. So I really think equality and partnerships and these equitable relationships and understanding the roles and what each partner has to contribute and valuing that accordingly is key. So historically, the social value may have been a tick box and may not have been valued as much as a economic contribution, but I think we are now at the point where we're moving past that. So that would be my 2 calls to action there. I tried to make it 1, but I ended up with 2. So
that's all right, thank you. I think if we just start to move into questions now. So this is an opportunity. We've got some questions in chat. If people do want to put their hand up and come on the screen and have a raise a question as well, we'd welcome that. I think, but just some of the early questions we had come in pre the event going live, and something we've seen come on the theme of the chat as well. What do we consider to be local? You know, how do we get underneath what is local, what is regional? So I think that's maybe a question for Rich Dickens and possibly Daniel or Andrew to come in on as well.
Good question. Simply for me, it's a footprint of the contracting organisation. So Cheshire East, take that for example, it will be everyone with a relevant postcode. So that doesn't always have to be, however, local organisation could be based there, but it could have a very high level of supply chain, customers, clients, relationships, partners. Regional bases, it speaks for itself again. That could be county based or the traditional regional concept. However, we are seeing more and more national. So the biggest thought process here, I would say, keep everything in the UK, keep everything in England, and then keep everything in the contracting organisation's footprint, and that would be considered local.
Okay. Anybody else on the panel got anything else they would want to add to that in terms of the definition or consideration on that? Has Rich nailed it? Fine. Okay, we'll move on.
Perfect.
There's a question around in your collective view, without being in your unbiased view, which industries are leading the way? You know, who could we be looking to for trailblazing, best practice?
Can I just jump in on this one quickly?
Yeah.
All of them. It depends. If you speak to a builder, let's say it's the building industry, we're leading the way. If you speak to someone like myself who's been in technology for 30 years, tech is leading the way. If you speak to the accountants, say the accountancy industry is leading the way. There's no single industry because every industry is actually interested in doing it, and they realise the importance of doing it and the importance of moving forward. I think the only difference is that now a lot more people are looking for. You've always had companies have had pet charities that they support, and you've had individuals that have had pet charities they support as well. Now it's just becoming a little bit more promoted that they support that, which is a good thing. And you know they're looking for big charities to cover. So which I know Davina would be very pleased about. So.
Okay. Anybody else got a comment on sectors and industry best practice? Other than Rich Davis, you can't say it's construction.
I can say on behalf. I did,
but I was on mute.
Just from my point of view, I think the traditional ones would be health and well-being, generally because cost-benefit analysis, cost-effective analysis, etc., have been considered, but it's never been thought of as social value. So that's one aspect. But I would say the larger expenditure of a government, local authority or a business tends to have a higher focus on social value initially, just because of the economic expenditure. So infrastructure / construction will be the two leaders at the moment. But Dan may have a view on that as well.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a runway nearby or it's not me.
That was a tractor going past my house, everyone. Sorry.
We have a few of them in Cheshire East. No, I think from a local authorities perspective, looking at who the sort of trailblazers are, And I'm going to reflect a little bit on one of the questions that Richard posed around sort of the bigger organisations having more of the opportunities around this, and I don't think that's for me. It's a bit of a myth. I think that from a large organisation perspective, I think a lot of the real sort of trailblazers seem to be from highways and capital type projects and organisations we get applications in from. I think price is obviously a key one, but often the social value will be the difference that can often influence a decision being made on a response to tender. So they do come up with weird and wonderful ways that really demonstrate social value. I think from a health and well-being organisation perspective, often they believe the contract is all social value, therefore they can't necessarily split between how they demonstrate what their outcomes of the project will be to actually that additionality. I think I'm going to slightly contradict Andrew's point of view and think actually from a technology point of view, that's where we really struggle to see social value demonstrated from a local authority's perspective when we get those response to tenders. When we're purchasing hardware or software or anything to do with technology, we really see that struggle to be demonstrated in some of our responses. So I think that's a bit of work we can do locally with that industry to change mindsets of what they could offer. And then sort of spinning it round a little bit in terms of the sort of beneficiary element of it. I think the connections local authorities can make between those sectors there's room for improvement. But I think from the big organisations to the small, the big often have the infrastructure and they can provide stuff, but then again, how much additional is it? The small organisations often have a more deep-rooted connection with their communities. Therefore, they can demonstrate impact a lot more. So things at scale, often big organisations. Things that are meaningful, often smaller organisations. So you get there's no necessarily. It's not swayed toward one type of organisation, I would say. Thank you.
Nat, can I come in there?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So what I would add to that is I think we, as a tier 1 contractor, have got again a moral responsibility to partner up with our supply chain and the social enterprises that we engage with to put them in that same space where they can understand how they can add social value. So there's a whole education piece that needs to go on there, which I think we recognise. The construction playbook is again a policy that's being promoted, and I think that's it's very clear that it set out requirements for us as leaders of industry to make sure we participate, and I think that's something that again we're maturing into.
And I think on and off. Davina, I think a question for yourself from a charity perspective, which, aside from kind of the sort of traditional fundraising, corporate sponsorship type model, which industries, sectors are you seeing come forward much more to want to have a more meaningful, deeper connection with the charity sector?
Ooh. I don't know if a particular sector is reflected, or I don't know whether that is something that is partly driven by opportunity. So if you think where National Star is located, a lot of our sector relationships are very much based with organisations who maybe have large headquarters near us. So EDF, Atkins Global, all those sorts of partners are their location-based relationships that they've sprung up from. And I think this was Andrew's point about the support of the local charity. Well, in a Gloucestershire context, National Star is a local charity. In a national context, it's a national charity. So I think some of these relationships emerge because of that. I think what's interesting is to look at some of the work local authorities are doing around bringing together the voluntary and community sector, where you've got large charities through to small charities, as Dan was describing, to bring that charitable sector together so that as a whole, a consortium of 25 charitable providers can have an impact by lending each other their skills and expertise within an area. So I think there's something interesting there, as well as in how local authorities or public sector bodies, private partners can bring together groups of people, not necessarily all charities, to make a complete skill set to address a particular need or have an impact in a particular community that they're looking for. The example that I'm thinking of is the Gloucestershire GEM project, which is led by Gloucestershire County Council, and that has done some brilliant work connecting voluntary and community sector, public and private partnerships as well. So, and that was one of the intended impacts of the project that's now going into its 4th year, was this network was created, and it was a network that would endure and be sustainable after the intervention project had finished. So I'll happily sort of share, I will send Richard more information about that, which he can move forward and share with everybody.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the questions we've had come through, which again sits quite squarely on some of the challenges about how social value is still evolving, is the fact that you might have 2 organisations who are measuring their value differently and wanting to go, to submit a tender or wanting to develop a position within a particular industry. So how can we collectively move towards having a more standardised approach to measuring and scoring social value?
If I can jump in there, it's an interesting question, actually. I think there's a couple of points here. The first one is actually having a universal, almost library of proxies, financial proxies, which the TOM, themes and outcome measures certainly start that, albeit there are a number of other areas. For example, the PSSRU, Public Social Services Research Unit, publish all the health and social care data. For example, same with Crime and Commission and DFE, all publish information which have credible sources. So that's one aspect. I think the second aspect is, like anything, people are sometimes coming up with crazy claims, crazy numbers, and just crazy facts about the great work they do. Some of which can be true, but some of which can be, should we say, a little bit hollow. So I would certainly encourage people to start to consider taking the level of interest and rigor they apply to financial accounting, because effectively social value is starting to come under the social accounting banner. So how are you accounting for social value? So that includes audit, that includes having a robust process, and most importantly, being transparent on where you're coming up with the figures, where you're making those claims, and also the big question, and I put it in chat, how influential are you? Because ultimately, not all value will be down to you. Value will be down to other organisations. So, for example, if Kia and National Star were to partner in the local area, but National Star do all the work, is it right that Kia can claim all the value? Well, actually, in some way, if there's an influence there, yes, but not all. So again, it's about being open and transparent, just like your financial accounts are.
And do you think there's, and we're obviously seeing, the social value model, movement from central government around, giving a steer on how to standardise some of this. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's more that can be done, that will start to be done in the future around sort of educating and training, people with procurement roles, for example, and going further in that space so that terminology becomes more consistent, scoring and proxies become more consistent?
Yes, absolutely. There is a rollout for procurement and commissioners being done as we speak to upskill those, to reduce some of the fear factor, and obviously include the clarity. This is new for a lot of people, including the people who are including it within government tenders. So we must say that. Obviously, from a social value point of view, we do some work with Modern Gov, so we're obviously helping to train and influence the new wave commissioners also. But it's just giving clarity, so understanding what you mean and define as social value. So when you do communicate it, actually the receiver understands, because there is no universal definition. There's no universal definition what output, outcome, impact, or even value is. So demonstrate that from day one. Have that front and centre of all your conversations, and at least then people can make an educated decision based on the information you provide.
And a question that's come through as well is around how can SMEs use social value to improve the environment and to increase diversity? This is more of a practical, operational question, really. What can SMEs?
That's a great one for Andrew, I think.
Of course it is, and that is not a that is not a problem at all. I've referred to myself and Richard have done half a dozen panel discussions like this on environment, on social values, and it's always, all of them have all had the same sort of thing, which is the SMEs are worried that the big boys are going to take all the work, because they're big. The big boys are worried the SMEs are going to take all the work because they're local and small, and sort of like the local authorities are just worried because they're trying to they're used to, this is how we do weightings, this is finance, this is service, this is how it works. And all of a sudden there's this grey area coming into the other end. Now, during one of these few panels that we've discussed, I spoke about an SME down in the West Country. And they say, we don't do anything for social, we don't cover anything, there's nothing we do. I said, well, okay, let's really dig into this. And then we found out that the MD is a very keen surfer, obviously, down in the West Country. And he takes part in a local charity that keeps the beach clean, and he supports some other sort of like ocean-based charities is what he does. And I said, but you do that as a business. That's that's kind of like a social value thing going on right there. And this was only I think it was a 3-man environment, so it wasn't a big organisation at all. Definitely classed as a micro SME. It's very, but they still did their bit. But we see this all the time. The SMEs are worried, and don't be worried at all, because it all depends on what the local authority, as we've been discussing through, actually wants. It depends on what the program is that they need. And you've got SMEs that will be, the architect that designs the roads that Kia then go and build. So they're heavily involved in massive projects, not just, when I say a small project, I don't mean sort of like, oh, it's just the one laptop to the local authority, but sort of like you've got the full range of projects that are covered by SMEs. And we've got a big push, with we have an SME agenda from the government to work with SMEs and help, and because that's not rocket science, is it? If an SME grows, it takes on more employment. That's quite a simple social value to have. But it's always been this, I wouldn't say a confusion, because everybody's looking into it and reading into it, but there's been this knowledge drop that just needs people to not worry, to make the phone call, to get onto panel discussions like this, to find out more information, and just understand how it all fits together. There is one question on the chat. Do you mind if I just jump in on something?
Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
Yeah, it was posted really early on by Sarah Redding, and which was just, how does ESG tie in?
Yeah.
Which is a nice one, because a lot of people would have seen, apart from the 20,000 acronyms that the government like to use, this is another one that's thrown into the mix recently. But the environmental, social, and corporate governance, or governance of the ESG. Well, this is absolutely the social side of that, of the ESG. This is how it fits in. So it's part of the ESG, not an addition to, or a supplement to. So it all fits together. And the policies that I mentioned to earlier, if you're doing a policy, take into account ESG. This is the social side of it. You need the environment side, and you need your governance. So that creates a really, really good policy for moving forward.
So just on that point, Andrew, just throw in there is, I think that's a really good point in terms of the ESG. Actually, the overarching view I have there is it's down to social responsibility. It's down to an individual. So if you see social responsibility as your overarching agenda, then you're into the ESG, and then you've got your different strands. And obviously social value is all to do with people. You've got your environmental. People influence environment, they affect it in different ways, but there obviously are different attributes and different measurement techniques, etc., for environmental. With the governance, actually, it's more about the ethics now. So we touched upon it previously. So how are you making decisions? How is that decision making in embracing, adding, developing, achieving more value? And ultimately, you know, organisations make profit. That's fine. Everybody makes profit. A charity makes profit. You just don't call it profit. It's surplus. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here tomorrow because it couldn't run. Ultimately, so what we've got to do is actually say, look, it's okay to make that. However, what is that journey along? How are you developing it? How are you influencing? How are you affecting people? How are those decisions influencing everybody around you? And very simply, one simple question you can ask yourself within ethical decision making, and it's called the New York Times test, and obviously it's Americanism, but would you be happy for your last decision to be on the front of the New York Times or the Mail or the Sun or the Mirror? Ultimately, it's a sobering thought, because we all make decisions who can push those barriers. But can we have that?
On that point, though, Richard, I think there's a question that came in about how do you balance the need to deliver social value and the economics of the business? And I think that is relevant regardless of your sector and regardless of your size. So I think this is open to everybody on the panel really to have a view on, you know, Richard Davis, whether you're a larger organisation with, you know, multi-billion turnover through to a smaller company, you know, maybe just starting out, where is that balance, and how can you, even if you haven't arrived at it, what can you be doing to strive towards it?
So if I will come back on that one, and I think it's partly related to the bit that Andrew was just saying. I think the you know, the piece for us is you know, being really close to our supply chain and educating them. I think that there is, you know, the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, if that's the right expression for here. Is that so we're doing a lot around training and educating our supply chain to make sure that they understand where the social value is in what they do. You know, we're in an industry that, you know, operates at below 2% margins, so the economics are there. You know, we're able to find that value, but we find it in a variety of places, but we're not spending it. You know, it's about the argument that says at the beginning of this, where you know, if you're setting a big stall out for social value in part of your commissioning, that job's going to be more expensive. Your budget's your budget. You'll just find a natural place for that project to land. And I think it's also the journey that social value has gone on, is that we know where to go find that stuff. We know where to, you know, and particularly for us, you know, and it's again that localism piece that we've talked about as a thread here. We really want to get alongside our customer to understand exactly what their needs are, because that's where we're going to get more bang for our buck in terms of the social value, and will leave a lot stronger impact. So I think it's the maturity around the piece of what we're delivering, and it naturally finds its space. I don't think projects become more expensive because we've added social value to it. It's a thing that yeah, is in the word economics. Yeah, natural balance.
Yeah, can I just mention something that Daniel mentioned earlier, was the fact that it's got to be fair and proportionate. So that's the other side of it. You can't do 5 laptops and say, right, the social value with this is, can you build a new leisure centre? It's not going to happen. So, I mean, Daniel knows, just pop back up on my screen. I'm not sure if you've been, but, you know, I would actually be interested in hearing your response on this, actually.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's kind of some of the points I've already linked into, and some of the bits that Richard's just mentioned. You know, there's every organisation's got their USP. They, you know, when I first met Richard, I think, and it's always the terminology that's kind of stuck with me because I'm so used to working with KPIs. You know, what's my, you know, unique selling point? But what KPIs are involved in this contract? And I thought that's what he said about 4 times during this conversation. What he was actually saying was KVIs, and that's that key value indicator. And that's linked to what your organisation's all about, what you want to achieve, what can you offer. And I think when I kind of mentioned earlier on about collaboration, you know, if you're a small organisation, you've got them deep-rooted connections with your communities. That is one of your USPs. You know, what expertise have you got in your organisation? What do you know about your local community? You're hands-on, you're operational, you know what the needs are. You know, as part of your response to tender, I'd be linking up with some of the bigger organisations, finding out, you know, who are experts in social value. You know, how do they measure it, and using some of their knowledge and links. So, you know, we mentioned before about a sort of calls to arms after this, and a key action. I'd have 2 really. One is, you know, link in with that social value award, because it'll give you a bit of a, where are you on this journey? Are you an expert? Do you know this stuff, or are you starting your journey? And there's no good or bad thing. You've got opportunity with either. And then once you've done that, share this message out to your organisations, whether it's your formal supply chains and help them, which Richard just mentioned, or your peers on a golf course, or wherever your circles connect. Share with them what opportunity you've got and get them to measure where they are, because that's when you'll start to get collaboration working at its best. Because if someone's at a 10 and someone's at a 1, collaborate and start sharing those expertise. But everyone has got something to offer. So think of your USB, and then think what your little nugget of KVI is. That's something that always sort of sticks with me now. Key value indicator. What it means, I have no idea. I'll have to ask Richard. But it sounds amazing. But no, what but no, what is it? You know, what can you measure? And the social value award really allows you to, like I said before, hold that mirror up. It makes you think about your own organisation and what is it you can offer.
Okay. I think we've only got a couple minutes left of the webinar. You know, unless there's anybody else still on the chat that's got sort of a burning question that hasn't been addressed, speak now, really. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up and just thank everybody. Firstly, thank the panelists for giving up your time, both in preparation, but also this morning in sharing your views. And thank you to everybody that's taken the time to join and listen and to ask questions and to hopefully take away 2 or 3 key points from this that will inform your own journey. And I think just recapping on what the panelists have said about it being an authentic journey, about it being a collaborative, about you holding the mirror up and not being perhaps fearful of getting out there and talking to the charity sector or talking to others in the in industries that you may not be as familiar with. I think the point also from Andrew about being wholly accountable, I think that is something that was a clear message from the panel today. Now is the time for you and your organisations to go away and own your social value and the direction you're taking, and then to make sure that that does align with those range of stakeholders that you are there to benefit either commercially or socially. So I think from our perspective, anything that we might have missed on the chat, we'll make sure we follow up. It is recorded. You will have everybody's details from the panel if you then want to go off and have, you know, further discussion and pick their brains. But really, it was just an opportunity to say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.